When I booked that plane ticket, I wasn't just planning a trip. I was planning my escape. What happened next shocked everyone and changed our family forever. For 36 years, I've been the family's backup plan. Not the golden child. Not the one whose photos adorned every hallway. I'm Megan, and I'm 36 now, but for most of my life, I was the forgotten daughter, the silent supporter, the free babysitter, the "you don't understand what real stress is" sister. The one they called when things needed fixing, but never when something was worth celebrating. And the star of this show? My sister Rachel, 43, the designated family treasure. I don't think there's a wall in my parents' house that isn't practically wallpapered with her debate trophies, framed articles, or her wedding portrait that takes up half the living room. My childhood memories are all tinted with one consistent feeling, being second. When I turned 10, I came home excited, hoping for cake and balloons. My parents forgot. No joke. They handed me the remains of Rachel's graduation cake, with her name still piped on top. "We didn't have time," my mom said, smoothing Rachel's college brochures with one hand and brushing me off with the other. That set the tone for everything. When I made the honor roll in 8th grade, Rachel had just joined the Model UN. Guess who got all the attention? When I won a citywide painting contest in high school, they were too busy helping Rachel prep for a college visit. My parents didn't show up to the award ceremony. I stood there in front of my art teacher, clutching a certificate with no one in the front row. You might think it's just the usual sibling favoritism, but it ran deeper. Rachel got new clothes, tutors, a car for college, everything. I got her hand-me-downs and a reminder that we're still paying off your sister's loans. When I asked for a smaller violin because Rachel's old one was too big for my fingers, my mother snapped. We already spent enough on Rachel's piano lessons. By the time Rachel got married 7 years ago, the entire family structure had warped around her. I was maid of honor by default, juggling spreadsheets for the guest list while working 60-hour weeks. My mother told me, "Don't be selfish, Megan. It's Rachel's time." That sentence still rings in my ears. Then came the twins. Rachel and her husband Brian had 2 boys, rowdy, relentless little hurricanes who turned every visit into a disaster. My parents were giddy. "Grandchildren!" they cried, emptying their retirement savings to help Rachel and Brian buy a house nearby. I, meanwhile, was told there was nothing left when I needed help during my final semester at community college. Suddenly, I became the default nanny. "Can you just watch the boys for a couple of hours?" turned into full weekends, sometimes without warning. I'd come home from a week of marketing deadlines only to find Rachel standing at my door with the boys already racing inside. "They need time at the beach," she'd say. "And Brian and I need a break." Every time I pushed back, I was guilt-tripped. "Family helps family," they'd say. "Don't you love your nephews?" And if I dared say I was overwhelmed, I was labeled bitter. "You're just jealous you're still single," Rachel once snapped. Like my entire existence was just a placeholder until I got married. The final straw came last month. After the twins destroyed my laptop and left crayon art all over my white couch, I booked myself a modest solo retreat to Sanibel Island. Just me, the beach, and silence. When I told my parents, their eyes lit up. "The twins would love the beach," my mom chirped. Rachel chimed in. "You can take them swimming while Brian and I grab dinner." I stood there, speechless, as they hijacked my escape in real time. By the end of dinner, they'd upgraded my booking, rearranged my entire itinerary, and turned my solo vacation into another weekend of unpaid childcare. I felt the last little shred of my sanity snap. That night, lying awake in bed, I booked a different flight. A different hotel. A different plan. I told no one. I packed my bags in silence, disabled location sharing, and when the day came, while they'd boarded a plane to Fort Lauderdale, expecting to meet me at a resort crawling with screaming kids, I was already gone. Off to a quiet island off the grid. They still don't know I'm not on that flight. They think I'm waiting with floaties and sunscreen. But I've never been freer. I wish I could tell you that the moment I walked through security with my boarding pass clutched in hand, I felt triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was fear. Not the kind that makes your heart race, but the kind that makes your hands shake as you sip coffee alone in an airport lounge, wondering if you've just set fire to your entire family for a few days of peace. I got there early, on purpose. I didn't want to risk a last-minute run-in. Their flight was scheduled an hour after mine, and I knew exactly which terminal they'd be using because of the original itinerary Rachel insisted I forward to her. For coordination. The irony burned. I sat by the wide glass windows overlooking the drop-off lane. I watched as my mom stepped out of the Uber first, her hat too large for her head, dragging a leopard print suitcase that probably still had the tags. Brian followed, phone glued to his ear, barking at someone. And then came Rachel, with her signature chaotic elegance, one twin clinging to her leg and the other shrieking because he couldn't find his dinosaur. They looked like a travel blog's worst nightmare. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I just turned my phone to airplane mode and walked to my gate. Right before I boarded, the text started. Rachel. Where are you? Gate 17. We're checking bags. Mom. Sweetie, did your Uber get lost? We're all here. Rachel. Wait, did you miss your flight? Call me. And then, the real storm. Brian. What the hell, Megan? You said you'd help with the boys. They're already asking for you. Mom. Megan, they're crying. We don't understand. Did something happen? And then, predictably, Rachel's grand finale. Rachel. I cannot believe you would do this. Selfish doesn't even begin to cover it. You've ruined everything. I stared at the screen. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt alive. When I landed on the island, there were no screaming toddlers. No errands. No demands. Just salt in the air, warm wind in my hair, and a weight off my chest I didn't realize had been there since I was 10 years old. The first 2 days were awkward. I kept checking the time, instinctively wondering, are the twins napping? Is this when Rachel would call? But no calls came. My silence was intentional, and my phone remained off, tucked in the drawer next to the complimentary notepad where I'd started journaling. On day 3, I met Leo. He was sitting by the beach bar, sketching on a napkin and drinking a mango smoothie like it was fine wine. He looked up and said, "You look like someone who just escaped something." I smiled. I told him he had no idea. Leo was a solo traveler too, from Minnesota, in town to reset his brain, as he put it. We talked for hours, about music, about the ocean, about the absurdity of families. I didn't mention mine. Not yet. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I went to sleep without anxiety bubbling in my chest. The next morning, I made a decision. I turned my phone back on. There were over 200 messages. Rachel, my mom, even my Aunt Susan, who I hadn't spoken to in years, left frantic voicemails. My dad, the quiet one, sent just one text. "We're not mad. Just confused. Please let us know you're safe." And weirdly, that one hurt the most. I texted the family group chat. "I'm fine. I'm safe. I'm on vacation. Please respect my space. I'll reach out when I'm ready." Then I muted the chat and didn't look back. But that wasn't the end. That was just the spark. Later that day, Leo asked, "So what happens when you go back?" And that's when I realized I wasn't going back. Not to the same role. Not to the same expectations. I was done being the default. I was done being invisible. What was supposed to be a 5-day vacation turned into the start of something much bigger. But I hadn't told them that yet. When I was 15, I sat on the front steps of our old house in New Haven for 4 hours in the rain because no one remembered to pick me up from my art showcase. It was one of the only events I had ever asked my family to attend. I'd painted a portrait of our late grandmother. Rachel had cried when she first saw it. My teacher had even entered it into the state exhibit. But the night of the event, my dad said he was tired, my mom said Rachel needed help packing for a debate meet, and Rachel said she couldn't find the time. So I went alone. When the showcase ended, I sat on those concrete steps in soaked sneakers, clutching a flyer I had made myself, until a janitor finally offered to call me a cab. I lied and said someone was coming. They weren't. That night, something inside me locked away a tiny version of myself, the one who still believed if I just did enough, worked hard enough, smiled the right way, they would see me. And for years I never went back to unlock that door. Until now. I don't know what changed exactly. Maybe it was the fresh sea air or the way Leo asked questions like he actually wanted to know the answers. But something cracked open on day 5 of the trip. He was walking me back from dinner, and I mentioned, almost casually, "I used to paint." He stopped in his tracks. "Used to?" I hesitated. "It didn't matter to anyone. It was just a phase, I guess." He tilted his head. "Or maybe it did matter. Just not to the people you wanted it to." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the balcony of my beachfront villa, journal in lap, trying to remember the last time I'd done something purely for joy. Not for approval. Not to prove a point. Not to keep someone else's world spinning. I made a list. The last time I painted, age 18. The last time I said no without guilt, unclear. The last time I planned a vacation for myself, never. The last time I felt seen, maybe now. And then something even more jarring. I realized I didn't know what my favorite color was anymore. I had spent so long defaulting to what the twins liked, what Rachel liked, what my mom called classic, that I didn't even know myself. Back in the resort lobby, I booked an art class with the concierge for the following morning. It was something simple, watercolors at sunrise with a local instructor. I woke at 5:30 a.m., threw on an oversized hoodie, and headed down barefoot with a towel and a brush roll I hadn't touched in years. That first stroke on the paper felt shaky. But the second was steady. By the 5th, I was painting again, not a masterpiece, but something that looked like a version of myself I had almost forgotten existed. Leo showed up halfway through. He sat beside me silently for a while, then handed me coffee. "You look different," he said softly. And I realized, I felt different. Not healed. Not whole. But real. That evening, as I watched the sun burn gold over the horizon, I opened my phone again. Another voicemail from my mom, her voice a mixture of disbelief and sugar-sweet guilt. "You've had your little vacation, Megan. Let's be adults now and move forward." "Rachel said you're being dramatic." Rachel had texted too. "Just FYI, the boys cried themselves to sleep. Hope that was worth it." But buried between the walls of guilt was a different message. One from my dad. "Meg, I don't understand why you left. But I know we haven't been fair. I want to fix it. Just tell me how." That was the first time in decades he'd said anything like that. I didn't respond. Not yet. But I saved the message. Something was shifting. I could feel it. I wasn't ready to go home. But I was ready to make a plan. Because what came next? That would change everything. I didn't go straight home from the airport. That was intentional. Instead, I checked into a small hotel downtown, nothing fancy, just clean sheets, quiet hallways, and a view of the skyline that felt like a new beginning. For the first time in years, no one knew where I was. I spent the first evening updating everything. Emergency contacts at work. My phone number. I changed the locks on my apartment, canceled the spare key Rachel had once borrowed, and wrote out a list of non-negotiable boundaries. Then I waited. It took 3 days before I slipped. I accidentally liked a coworker's Instagram photo. Within 4 hours, my mom and Rachel were at my apartment building. My phone started buzzing nonstop. The intercom rang again and again, echoing like a fire alarm. I didn't answer. I watched them from the hotel window across the street, standing there in the heat with their arms crossed and their faces contorted in confused frustration. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. The next morning, I messaged them all to meet me at a neutral coffee shop. I chose a place with big windows, an open floor plan, and, most importantly, an exit near the back. Call it a reflex. I arrived early and picked a seat facing the door. My palms were damp, my breath shallow, but I held firm. They arrived together, my mom, my dad, Rachel, and Brian. No twins, thankfully. I think even they sensed this wasn't a social call. Rachel was the first to speak, her tone falsely sweet. "So, where have you been?" I raised my hand to silence her. "Let me talk. Please." I unfolded a small sheet of paper, but I didn't need it. I had rehearsed every word during sleepless nights on that island. "I'm setting boundaries," I said calmly. "They're not suggestions. They're requirements." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in emotional gaslighting. Rachel cried. "You traumatized the boys." Mom weaponized guilt. "After everything we've done for you." Brian tried to play mediator. "What if we compromise? You take the kids every other weekend?" Dad mostly sat in uncomfortable silence, until I said this. "Yes, family means sacrifice. But it's supposed to go both ways. When was the last time any of you sacrificed anything for me?" And then, finally, the room went quiet. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. "Here's what my last year looked like," I said, sliding it across the table. "Every weekend. Every holiday. All booked for you." Rachel started to interrupt, but I cut her off. "That's what a paid nanny does. Not a sister." Then I looked directly at Rachel. "If you need that much help, maybe it's time to hire one." Something in her face broke. A mask falling off. She stood and stormed out, my mom scrambling behind her. Brian followed, tossing a, "You know we're not bad people," over his shoulder. That left my dad. He didn't move for a while. Then finally he said, "We never meant to make you feel like this." It wasn't an apology. But it was the first time I had ever heard him speak without defending Rachel. I nodded once. "I know." That night, I moved into a new apartment across town. Smaller, quieter, but safer. I gave my new contact info only to a select few at work and 2 friends from my pottery class. I started saying yes to things I'd always declined, like weekend hikes, art meetups, book clubs. The first Saturday night I spent alone reading a novel, sipping wine, and knowing no one would show up to drop off kids unannounced. I cried. Not because I was sad. Because I felt free. Their response? Predictable. Rachel posted a long, veiled Facebook rant about ungrateful family members. My mom left a voicemail that said, "When you're done with this phase, we'll welcome you back." But they didn't understand. This wasn't a phase. This was the start of my real life. It had been almost 3 months since the coffee shop showdown when my dad appeared unannounced at my office. Not outside my apartment. Not through some guilt-soaked voicemail. He walked right into my workplace lobby with a paper bag of pastries and that same solemn expression he used to wear when he'd miss my piano recitals to take Rachel to soccer. "Lunch?" he asked. It wasn't a request. It was a peace offering. We walked to a quiet diner nearby, one I liked because the booths were wide and the music was soft, and nobody asked questions. He sat across from me, folded his hands over the paper bag, and looked older than I remembered. "You look different," he said finally. "Healthier. Happier." I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. Then he got to the point. "Your mother and Rachel, they're willing to make concessions," he said, like he was reading off a business deal. "Every other weekend off. They'll even pay for your time with the twins." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out dry and loud, and it startled the woman at the next table. "They still don't get it," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't about getting paid. This isn't about time off." He leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Then what is it about?" I finally looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man I'd spent my life trying to please, but someone who genuinely didn't understand why I left. "It's about freedom," I said. "And dignity. And the fact that I've spent 36 years being a placeholder in my own family." He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. I told him about all of it, the birthdays they missed, the way they ignored my wins, the constant guilt trips. The painting contest, the graduation ceremony they never came to, the years of sacrificed weekends. I even told him about the beach trip that broke me. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time. "We thought we were doing what was best," he finally said. "We didn't see how much we were hurting you." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest I'd ever gotten. Later that week, Rachel posted a tearful video on Instagram claiming her sister abandoned the family for a yoga retreat and a man named Leo. My mom's latest voicemail referred to my actions as a reckless rebellion, and warned I'd regret this when I had kids of my own. But their words didn't cut anymore. I wasn't a wound. I was a scar. And scars are tougher than skin. My apartment started feeling like a home. The walls weren't filled with noise, but with photographs I had taken myself, of pottery pieces, art classes, group hikes, and smiling new friends. Friends who asked me about me. Leo and I still talk, often. He's not a fairy tale. He's something better, quiet, steady, real. He came to my first pottery show last week and stayed after to help clean up. "You're not invisible anymore," he whispered. And I believed him. The biggest change? Time. It belongs to me now. Weekends are for farmers' markets, trail walks, or simply doing nothing. I picked up Spanish, started running, and finally booked that art class in Barcelona I had dreamed about for years. And one more thing, I painted again. This time, it was a watercolor of the beach from that quiet island, the one I ran to when no one else heard me. I titled it Departure. Last week, Rachel's husband Brian emailed me. A surprise. He said things had shifted since my absence. They'd hired part-time help. He'd become a more involved father. Rachel was struggling, but he admitted they had leaned on me far too much. "It wasn't fair," he wrote. "But your distance helped us see that." That was the closure I didn't expect. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes, healing looks nothing like what you thought it would. Sometimes, it starts with vanishing. But it ends with reclaiming your life.